Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut, a biweekly conversation in which AARP staff and volunteers talk to the Connecticut decision makers about policies and programs that are of interest to older residents. My name is John Erlingheuser, and I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy and Community Outreach here at AARP Connecticut. And I'm very pleased to be joined by one of our great AARP Connecticut volunteers, Peter Eder. Peter, thanks for being with us today. And why don't you tell a little about yourself to the folks watching today and what you do at AARP and your background?
Sure. When I retired from full-time work in 2007, Kathy said to me, "What are you going to do to get out of the house?" And I said, "I'm going to become a full-time volunteer." And I have. Okay. Just what's on my plate still, founding board member of an active volunteer of At Home in Darien, which is our aging in place organization of 4,100 members. I sit on the Darien Commission on Aging. I'm on the advisory council of SWACA, the Southwestern Connecticut Area on Aging. I'm an active library volunteer. And really the linchpin to all of it, because I really was starting just fresh as a volunteer, was AARP. AARP really taught me the value of being a volunteer, how to be a volunteer, provides a great deal of information, and also serves, I think, as a leadership network for a lot of our volunteering in our communities. For AARP, I've been active on elder care issues over the years. I'm a community engagement specialist, and every year for the last 5 years, including this one, I spend 10 hours a week working on AARP tax aid. That's every week from early January to mid-April. So that's pretty much me.
That's great, Peter. You're indicative of so many of the great volunteers that we have here in Connecticut that do the work for us at AARP and helping move an agenda that benefits so many. So we really do appreciate that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that you're also a constituent of our very special guest today. And at this point, it's my pleasure to welcome State Senator Bob Duff of the 25th District. He's the Senate Majority Leader. And, Senator Duff, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, maybe outside of the legislature, what towns you represent, and anything like that you think would be pertinent for our viewers across the state to know?
Sure, no problem. Thanks, John, for having me. I really appreciate it. And AARP for putting this together. Peter is a good friend and constituent who I represent in the town of Darien. I represent Norwalk and Darien. Been in this, and I started in the House in 2002 in a special election, and then was elected to a full term. And then the Senate seat opened up in 2004, won that, and have been state senator from 2005 to the present. Been majority leader since about 2012. And it's a job I still enjoy, serving people and representing them here at the state capitol. I think we get an awful lot done. And as I always tell people, it's a lot easier, I think, to fight state capitol than it is to fight city halls. And get to make a point to listen as best that we can and being open and accessible here, and taking everybody's opinion before we actually vote on legislation. I'm a fifth generation Norwalker. I went to Norwalk Public Schools. I did some substitute teaching my past life. I've been married for over 20 years and have 2 boys and my dog Molly. So, it's just great to be part of the community. And I think that's a wonderful thing about being in state legislatures. People sometimes ask, "Oh, do you stay up in Hartford? Do you have an apartment up here?" I'm like, no, I go back and forth every day. And, when the kids were still in school, I made a point of really trying hard to get home when they got off the bus every day, just to kind of keep that balance of work life and making sure you're home for the kids. So, but, you and I have worked together for a long time, and I'll give your listeners a fun fact that nobody would ever guess, is that you and I have known each other since high school, because we went on a conference together when I think I was a junior in high school, and you might have been a junior as well, or something like that. But that's by chance we first met, and then we met many years after that working on some campaigns. But this world is full circle here, and we learn from each other every single day. And I'm just glad to be able to partner with you on some legislation and work with Peter and the good folks at AARP and the folks over at Home in Darien. They do a really great job advocating for seniors.
Well, we certainly appreciate your work, Senator, and we look forward to continuing that work. And I know we're going to get to talk about some of the stuff we're going to be working on this session and continuing to work on. So with that, I'm going to kind of turn it over to Peter. And Peter, why don't you take it from here for a bit?
Or I'd like to step back just for a second. If you could maybe explain a bit more what a Senate Majority Leader does. I think a lot of people don't know that, and why it's important, and what your key responsibilities are.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Peter. It's kind of interesting because there's times where, people think that as the majority leader, whatever you say goes. That's not exactly how life is, and I wish that were the case sometimes, where we had magic wands and we could make people do what we thought was the right thing. But in politics, you have to corral folks, you have to convince them, you have to work with them, you have to listen, you have to compromise, you have to do all those things. And my job really, and that's really just a state senator, majority leader, is really running the floor of the Senate when we're in session, negotiating with the Republicans. We have a 24-12 majority, Democrats versus Republicans, and working with Republicans to make sure their things get some votes, make sure our agenda gets through. I would say to folks, because I talk to, whether it's senior men's groups that sometimes invite me in to speak, or whether it's kids in school, and I say to them, how many of you think that here in Hartford at the state capitol, we're screaming at each other and yelling and throwing chairs and this and that and everything else, and a lot of hands go up, and I say, well, what if I told you 85% of the legislation that we pass is actually unanimous, and 95% of it's actually bipartisan? There's times where we have fights, philosophical fights, and sometimes there's issues of budget or there's issues of policy that we disagree with, and that's okay, because that shows the difference between the two parties. But sometimes it's not even always parties. Sometimes it could be geography, or it could be something else that where people don't agree. But I would say that we generally tend to work pretty well together. But I'm glad that we're in the majority. I'm glad that we actually, well, I know we're going to get into it. We have our agendas, but my job as majority leader is run the floor, screen our bills, which means to review the bills before they hit the floor, make sure they're ready, and to basically be a traffic cop, so that by the time we're done on midnight of May 8th, we've gotten most of the things done that we want to get done.
Great, thanks.
That's a lot of responsibility, and you certainly do bring a lot of skill to that over the last 10 years or so. So you've been in that role. You were in the House. You're in the Senate. You're the majority leader. I know in a minute we're going to talk about some of the things you're working on currently. But why don't you tell us, what do you think some of the biggest things you've accomplished in the legislature, either as just a senator or as the majority leader, have been in the last few years? And I know there are things we've worked on with you that we're quite proud of. So, but whatever comes to mind.
Yeah, well, I'll mention a few things. One is the housing trust fund bill. When I first got elected in the Senate, we put $100 million toward affordable housing and a housing trust fund, which was at the time was a really big deal. Now we're putting over $500 million a year. This was $100 million over 5 years. But that was kind of a big deal that I was really proud of, that, activating that account again, that fund. Second was when I chaired the Banks Committee, was doing a lot of the work we did on foreclosure prevention, and making that go. It was really a lot of first in the nation things that we did, which was foreclosure mediation at a time where we had the subprime mortgage crisis before the meltdown of even 2008, and getting that done, and literally knowing that you help save thousands of people from losing their homes. I mean, there's really no better feeling. A lot of times you pass legislation, John, and you know this, that is so intangible. You can't always put your finger on the bill or the policy, and knowing that it really, really made a big difference for folks. But when you pass something like foreclosure mediation or the Emergency Mortgage Assistance Program or EMAP, those kinds of things, it really does, it's making a difference. I would also say, even in the education space, helping to rewrite the education cost sharing formula over the last few years, back in 2017, and seeing more money get put into secondary education in a fair way has been a big deal. And I also say a lot of consumer protection bills that you and I have worked on together over the years have really made a big difference, whether it's in data privacy, whether it's making sure people still get paper bills if they want. This year's legislation on junk fees and the strong testimony of AARP has been very, very helpful. So, there's always more things you want to do, but I think I feel very proud of the record built over the years. But I will just say, as an asterisk to all that, nothing is done by one person or nothing's done in a vacuum. This is why I joke that it's easier to fight state capitol than city hall, because it takes a lot of people to get something done. And one of the things I want to just press upon for the people who are listening today is that, I can't do things, even as a majority leader, I can't do things by myself. And I have to rely on kind of the army of folks who believe in a bill or legislation to help me with that legislation. So, for example, like people like Peter, and others who are advocates for senior issues. If I have, some of the stuff that we've done, and we had a press conference recently on Senate Bill 8, which is about making prescription drugs cheaper. We can't get that stuff through unless we have really the army of AARP and other advocates around the state push and push and push to get that through, because the lobbying on the other side is intense, and they would win if we didn't have good activists like Peter.
And we were, we worked on that bill on the mortgage foreclosure issue. That was just huge. People forget, it's like so far back now, but God, it was a major crisis, and that was a really, great piece of legislation that was, kind of out in the forefront nationwide, and we're quite proud of working on that. So we do appreciate that work and other work that you do. And Peter.
Yeah, let's turn to what's on the plate right now, and maybe we should start with Senate Bill number 3. You started to mention it, consumer protection. Consumer protection in the internet age gets pretty complex, doesn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. And here's the interesting thing, Peter, is that a lot of people talk to me about cable fees and cable companies, and there's just a lot of unhappiness. And sometimes I wonder, like, who's hated more, the cable companies or the electric companies, because people don't feel like they get good service from either. And I will say that we've been pushing on these issues. Just last year, we did that mergers and acquisition bill that for most people will go way over their heads because they may not understand that, and I wouldn't expect them to. But AARP was very, very helpful with that bill last year, because you all understood that if a company is going to be taken over, if they're going to merge with another, there should be some sort of review, not just simply handing in a piece of paper. And this year with Senate Bill 3, we're looking at net neutrality. We're looking at eliminating junk fees, which could be on your cable bill. It could be in your anywhere, really. Think about all the times where you purchase something and the next thing you know there's a product fee. That's like a junk fee. We have something else called right to repair, which makes things easier to repair for folks by using common tools rather than something that only maybe a store might have. So, for example, if you wanted to change the battery in your iPhone, there needs to be kind of simple tools to get that done. So you don't have to just go over to your local retailer to get it fixed and pay a lot more money than you normally would. We have something there also about listening, making sure that devices, we prohibit them from listening to your conversations, which, it sounds kind of conspiratorial. It's really not, because Amazon got fined for that, and Cox Media Company said that they actually bragged about it on one of their investor calls. So those are some of the kind of things that we're working on. Also trying to keep the internet affordable for folks, and that's, especially as the federal money runs out, that's really an important thing to do too. So that's in essence Senate Bill 3, and we're going to continue to fight for that till the end of the legislative session.
And that's critical, and we were very pleased to see that bill introduced. And I'd be remiss if we didn't mention, you mentioned the merger and acquisitions bill, because that is critical to ensuring people's, are treated fairly when these deals are taking place, because we see that very often that there's a huge consumer impact when these deals take place. And I think what you've proven over the last year or two, and continue to prove that, the cable industry is not untouchable, and there are things the state of Connecticut can do to rein in their practices. And not only are you taking it on, but you're getting success, and we were very pleased to recognize you as one of our consumer champions for 2023 for that work. And it may go over some people's head, but as you said, we understood the importance of it, and not only in a symbolic way, but also in a real meaningful way in terms of how that and then the continuing work with Senate Bill 3 will have on people moving forward. So we do appreciate that.
Thank you. If I can just add one thing, the part of the landscape that changed, I think, over the last few years was that even when I was on the Energy and Technology Committee, even chaired the Energy and Technology Committee, is that there's always kind of a notion that these companies were untouchable from a state perspective because they were really federally regulated. But there's been a series of court cases, federal court cases, that have been in the favor of states. Net neutrality, mergers and acquisitions, or no, I'm sorry, not mergers and acquisitions, net neutrality, and also the one about the monthly not being charged for the end of the month. So if you cancel on the 10th of the month and your billing cycle is the 20th of the month, you don't have to pay that extra 10 days. Cable companies fought that like crazy, but they actually lost in court twice. So I think you're seeing now judges who were as frustrated as kind of the rest of us are. The fact that Congress can't really get out of its own way on so many of these consumer protection issues, they're ruling in favor of the fact that states actually have a right to opine on these things and set policy in their own state. So that's what you guys were really helpful on the data privacy law. We have one of the strongest data privacy laws in the entire country, and that was not possible a few years ago, but it is today.
And AARP was the Connecticut's data privacy law was the first one that we kind of chimed in on because of the quality of the work, and we worked very closely with you and your caucus and Chairman Maroney on that law. So we do appreciate that. So now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about a paid sick leave. I know several years ago, AARP, we worked on with your caucus and others to get paid sick leave passed. It was a landmark law at the time for our state to initiate paid sick days. I mean, I know you have this year Senate Bill 7. It's a priority bill. And it'll make improvements to this law, and AARP is supporting Senate Bill 7. But why is this bill so important to residents and why is it so important for us to update our paid sick leave laws in Connecticut?
Well, let's look at it this way in the most basic form. If you are shopping somewhere or interacting with somebody, and somebody's coughing or sneezing, people really don't want to be around you, right? So, we have a policy here in the state that says a group of people that were carved out when we did the bill the first time have paid sick time based on the number of hours worked. They get a accrue days. Especially since the pandemic, but even before then, nobody thinks people should be forced to go to work when they're not feeling well. And on top of that, infecting everybody else. But that was highlighted so much more during the pandemic as well. And so, really modernizing and updating the law that was passed many years ago is the right thing to do. And, we know a lot of times, just like with the minimum wage, the folks who don't get the help they need tend to be poor, tend to be Black and brown residents, women. And so, we need to make sure that we are staying on course with the policies that we pass and not just saying, hey, we passed that many years ago, we're done with that. This year, thanks to the work of Senator Kushner, she's looking to update that, and it will be one I believe we will pass this year.
And we're appreciative, and that is, it's important to us for all those reasons. I mean, you look at healthcare workers and people that are more compromised, immunocompromised, older folks, and as well as, we really truly support the expansion of what it means to be, taking care of a loved one, the caregiving piece, because, you may have a spouse, or a significant other that you live with that under the law is currently not eligible to get paid sick days because they're not married, for example. So they're this is all important stuff, and it's important for all the reasons that you laid out. So we do appreciate that. So Peter.
Yeah, another issue I know is top of mind and in the legislature too is drug affordability. In the last month, Kathy and I have had to add Eliquis to our prescription diet, and the initial price was almost $700, and we whittled it down to $583 a month. And this is with Medicare and supplemental coverage. It's just to us illustrative. I mean, again, we're fortunate enough that we could at least handle that, but you might want to talk about that because that's truly a concern for seniors.
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the press conference, when the bill was rolled out, we heard President Biden at his State of the Union talk about affordability of prescription drugs. And this is obviously a topic not only here in the state of Connecticut, but all across the country. And it just shows that, him using his time to talk about this just shows that it's still an issue. And thankfully, the Democrats in Congress, signed by the president, part of the Inflation Reduction Act, which helped to cap some Medicare drugs, not all of them, but some of them.
Right.
And that will really help. But that just shows that we still have a long ways to go. And here in Connecticut, I think we've been a leader on these issues. Senator Lester certainly has been leading on this issue for a long time. Senator Looney, without a doubt, in his role before me as majority leader and as Senate president, now has been working really hard on it. And so here's a few things we got to do. One is figure out ways in which we can lower the cost of prescription drugs. Two is reimportation from Canada. One of those ways, Peter, that you can save money by getting those drugs. Florida, you can do that. You can't do that here in Connecticut, but some states are now doing this. And then three, insulin and diabetes medicine is still too expensive. Now, Connecticut was one of the first states in the nation to pass a cap on those costs, but we can even do more now. So, because again, these are medicines that save lives, or medicines that people need, and especially in the case of insulin, which we've tackled already. But these are things that don't need to be expensive. They're only expensive for the really fattening wallets of big drug companies, and there's really not a lot of fairness there. So we're trying to inject more fairness into the healthcare realm. Because of the fact that folks like you on a fixed income should not be paying $500 a month for a drug. That's not a good balance. It's not a good quality of life, and nobody should be making.
And it's very confusing to us because again, I take a heart medicine and it's $12 a month.
Right. Exactly.
This is important.
And I'm sure a lot of the folks who are listening to this certainly can empathize and sympathize with you because they probably have the same issue.
Yeah, and this is great and really important. And AARP worked and supported the Inflation Reduction Act that started that negotiation of drug prices, and we certainly have endorsed Senate Bill 8 that has the Prescription Drug Affordability Board and the reimportation as well as the insulin cap. So we do appreciate that, and I know we are working very closely with Senator Lesser on getting that passed, and we do appreciate it. So we're coming close. We're almost there. So here's an opportunity. We'd like to give you, Senator, to tell us, what are any of the other priorities that you think, whether we're working on them or not, that you think might be important for our viewers to hear about that are your priorities, your caucus's priorities for the 2024 session.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. I think for me, housing is a huge issue. And, it's interesting. I was just traveling, and no matter where you go, what state or country you're in, housing is a huge, huge issue. There's just not enough housing. And so here in Connecticut, you've got to really have to continue to push this. We have been over the last few years. Governor Lamont has put a lot of money into building housing. Governor Roy did that before that. We still got to do more. We got to get our communities to own up to the fact that they need to put more housing for them as well. And I'm talking about a diverse housing stock. I'm talking about housing for recent college graduates, for people who are just starting out, for working families, for middle class families, for seniors. We need to build more housing, but we also need to rehab and maintain the housing that we have. I look at housing in Norwalk. We have a great place called the Marvin that was finished up in the early 90s. We just put about $3 million there, but it still needs additional work to be rehabbed. I look at senior housing in Norwalk at the Ward Street and Main Avenue and those areas, Freeze apartments. Those need to be redone. There's no elevators. They really still look like they've looked from the 1960s, probably. So we've got to really make sure we're having that. They're not ADA accessible, which is really terrible in this day and age. But we have about 100,000 units. We're about 100,000 units short of where we need to be, and we have over 100,000 job openings. We cannot grow this economy in the state without more housing, and employers will not come here if they don't have any employees. And I'll give you a first-hand example. I was speaking to a CEO over at Merit 7, where there's 1 million square feet of office space. He wants to hire 300 new people over the next 5 years. 300 new people, software engineers. They're going to start out about $100,000 a year. But he will not expand if he can't find the employees. He'll just expand someplace else in another state. So so we're going to leave all that tax money on the table because we're not doing all we can for housing. So this is why this is such an important issue. It's the right thing to do for one, and two, it's an economic argument as well. And I can go on and on about different priorities. That was long enough, so I'll leave it there.
No, that's great. And actually, I think we're coming close on time. So, Peter, why don't you just ask our last question, and then I'll wrap it up for us.
Okay, well, the last question is, you see our red shirts a lot. I'm not wearing one, and neither is John, actually.
My great.
I've seen them once or twice, Peter, so I think I know what they look like.
But a more serious question. I mean, so many of our towns, for example, have lost their local newspapers, like the Darien Times, for example. And there's so much chatter and so many different media. How do we stay close to the legislature? How do we influence you? And how do you hear us? And how do we listen to you?
Right. Well, we have breakfast once a year at the Darien Diner, but that's just us. But for everybody else, obviously, I'm very easily accessible. People can call me at home. They can call me here at the Capitol. They can email me. I answer my own emails. They can find me on social media at Senator Duff on Facebook, or at Senator Duff on Twitter, or at Senator Duff on Instagram. I'm on Threads as well at Senator Duff. I send out a weekly e-newsletter as well. People can come up here and testify. And one of the great things now with technology is that people can testify via Zoom rather than having to drive up to Hartford for the 3 minutes and then drive them all the way back. And that really is limited folks from Fairfield County from coming up, or other parts of the state where it's not that close to be here. So I think one of the things about most legislators is that they're pretty accessible, and that if you see them somewhere, you can stop and say hi, or you can write an email. But I agree with you. It's different than it used to be from a media standpoint. But I post my own stuff. I'll post this video once I get it. So that people know what I'm up to. We have office hours, we have community forums. So just look for ways. That's why it's important to get on whoever your state legislator is, your state senator, your state rep. It's really important that you get on their e-newsletter list so that you can kind of keep up as to what they're all doing.
Right. Thank you.
Well, I certainly do appreciate that. And I just want to say to Peter, one of our great volunteers, is indicative of the kind of people, great volunteers volunteer for a lot, and they're always busy. You always, doers do. And so we appreciate Peter and for all he's done for us over the years. And I certainly do want to thank you, Senator, for all the work you do on behalf of your constituents and for the members of AARP and so many priorities we've worked on with you over the years. And we appreciate all that you've done for us there.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, John.
You got it. And so I want to thanks to all of you for tuning in for another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP Connecticut. You could join us again in 2 weeks for another episode and catch back episodes on demand right here on our Facebook page or on our YouTube page. You can scan this QR code to become an e-advocate and help us advance policies important to the 50 plus in Connecticut. Thank you all.